to verify my YouTube account. I don't know why it made me do that in the middle of the live, but we're gonna continue to book. As soon as my wife came in, it started messing up, so we gonna blame her. We don't know what type of energy she brought in the room. It made my live start tripping, but I ain't gonna blame her. But still, that did happen when she came in. Trying to wait till like people who's in here come back in before I start the book. But they could always like just wind it. Or should I just play it? Oh yeah, just rewind it.
But they are also dangerous because people who have not mastered themselves overfeed the appetites. Self-mastery contemplates sufficient control over the appetites to enable one to feed them what they need and withhold food not needed.
Your viewpoint is both interesting and educational. Describe the details through which I may understand how and under what circumstances people overfeed the appetites.
Take the desire for physical food, for example. The majority of people are so weak in self-discipline, they fill their stomachs with combinations of rich food, which please the
Make sure y'all
taste,
get this
but
video
overwork
thumbs up
the
again.
organs of digestion and
My live was
elimination.
tripping because I had
They
to.
pour into their stomachs both quantity and combinations of food, which the body chemist can dispose of only by converting the food into deadly toxic poisons. These poisons clog and stagnate the body's sewer system until it slows down in its work of elimination of waste matter. After a while, the sewer system stops working altogether, and the victim has what he calls constipation. By that time, he is ready for the hospital. Auto-intoxication, or body sewer poisoning, takes the machinery of the brain and rolls it into something resembling a wad of putty. The victim then becomes sluggish in his physical movements and mentally irritable and fussy. If he could only take one good look at and one bad smell of his sewer system, he would be ashamed to look himself in the face. City sewers are not the pleasantest of places when they become overloaded or clogged, but they are clean and sweet compared with the intestinal sewer when it has been overloaded or clogged. This is not a pretty story to be associated with the pleasant and necessary act of eating, but that is where it belongs, because overeating and wrong food combinations are the evils which cause auto-intoxication. People who eat wisely and keep their body sewers clean handicap me, because a clean body sewer generally means a sound body and a brain that functions properly. Imagine, if your imagination can be stretched that far, how any human being could move with definiteness of purpose with his body's sewer filled with enough poison to kill 100 people if it were injected into their bloodstream directly.
And all this trouble is the result of lack of control over the physical appetite for food.
Well, if you wish to be absolutely correct, you should say that improper eating is responsible for the majority of the ills of the body, and practically all headaches. If you want proof of this, select 100 people suffering with headaches and give each of them a thorough washing out of their body sewer systems with a high enema. And observe that no fewer than 95 of the headaches will disappear within a few minutes after the sewers have been cleaned.
From all you say about the intestinal tract, I gather the impression that mastery over the physical appetite for food means also mastery over the habit of neglecting to keep the intestines clean.
Yes, that is true. It is just as important to eliminate the waste matter of the body and the unused portions of food as it is to take the right amount and the correct combinations of food.
I never thought of auto-intoxication as...
Don't you start tripping now? This shit always happening. It's probably something that needs to be truly heard. That's why it's messing up. Like, that happens a lot. Like, energy be influencing technology. So, just bear with me. Wow. I can't do nothing about it. I just the internet.
If humans would control their sex desires and transmute them into a driving force with which to carry on their occupation, That is, if they spent on their work 1/2 the time they dissipate in pursuit of sex, they would never know poverty.
Do I understand you to imply there is a relationship between sex and poverty?
Yes, where sex is not under definite control. If allowed to run its natural course, sex will quickly lead one into the habit of drifting.
Is there any relationship between sex and leadership?
Yes, all great leaders in every walk of life are highly sexed, but they follow the habit of controlling their sex desires, switching them into a driving force behind their occupation.
Is the habit of overindulgence in sex as dangerous as the habit of taking narcotics or liquor?
There is no difference between these habits. Both lead to hypnotic control through the habit of drifting.
Why does the world look upon sex as something vulgar?
Because of the vulgar abuse people have made of this emotion. It is not sex that is vulgar. It is the individual who neglects or refuses to control and guide it.
Do you mean by your statement that one should not indulge the desire for sex?
No, I mean that sex, like all other forces available to man, should be understood, mastered, and made to serve man. The desire for sex expression is as natural as the desire for food. The desire can no more be killed than one can entirely stop a river from flowing. If the emotion of sex is shut off from the natural mode of expression, it will break out in some other, less desirable form, just as a river will, if dammed, break through and flow around the dam. The person who has self-discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it, and learns to control and transmute it into constructive activities.
And just what damage is there in overindulgence of sex?
The greatest damage is that it depletes the source of man's greatest driving force and wastes, without adequate compensation, man's creative energy. It dissipates energy needed by nature to maintain physical health. Sex is nature's most useful therapeutic force. It depletes the magnetic energy which is the source of an attractive, pleasing personality. It removes the sparkle from one's eyes and sets up discord in the tone of one's voice. It destroys enthusiasm, subdues ambition, and leads inevitably to the habit of drifting on all subjects.
I would like for you to answer my question in another way by telling me what beneficial ends the emotion of sex may be made to attain if mastered and transmuted.
Controlled sex supplies the magnetic force that attracts people to one another. It is the most important factor of a pleasing personality. It gives quality to the tone of voice and enables one to convey through the voice any feeling desired. It serves, as nothing else can serve, to give motive power to one's desires. It keeps the nervous system charged with the energy needed to carry on the work of maintaining the body. It sharpens the imagination and enables one to create useful ideas. It gives quickness and definiteness to one's physical and mental movements. It gives one persistence and perseverance in the pursuit of one's major purpose in life. It is a great antidote for all fear. It gives one immunity against discouragement. It helps to master laziness and procrastination. It gives one physical and mental endurance while undergoing any form of opposition or defeat. It gives one the fighting qualities necessary under all circumstances for self-defense. In brief, it makes winners and not quitters.
Are those all the advantages you claim for controlled sex energy?
No, they are only some of the more important benefits it provides. Perhaps some would believe the greatest of all the virtues of sex is that it is nature's method of perpetuation of all living things. This alone should remove all thought that sex is vulgar.
I gather from what you say that the emotion of sex is a virtue, not a fault.
It is a virtue when controlled and directed to the attainment of desirable ends. It is a fault when neglected and permitted to lead to acts of lust.
Why aren't these truths taught to children by their parents in the public schools?
The neglect is due to ignorance of the real nature of sex. It is just as necessary in maintaining health for one to understand and properly use the emotion of sex as it is to keep the body's sewer system clean. Both subjects should be taught in all public schools and all homes where there are children.
Wouldn't the majority of parents need instruction on the proper function and use of sex before they could intelligently teach their children?
Yes, and so would the public school teachers.
What relative position of importance would you give to the need for accurate knowledge on the subject of sex?
It is next to the top of the list. There is but one thing of greater importance to human beings. That is accurate thought.
Do I understand you to say that knowledge of the true functions of sex and ability to think accurately are the two things of greatest importance to mankind?
That is what I intend you to understand. Accurate thinking comes first because it is the solution to all man's problems, the answer to all his prayers, the source of opulence and all material possessions. Accurate thinking is aided by properly controlled and directed sex emotion, because sex emotion is the same energy as that with which one thinks. It begins with those who desire self-determination sufficiently to be willing to pay its price. No one can be entirely free, spiritually, mentally, physically, and economically, without learning the art of accurate thinking. No one can learn to think accurately without including, as a part of the needed knowledge, information on the control of sex emotion through transmutation.
It will be a great surprise to many people to learn there is so close a relationship between thinking and sex emotion. Tell us now about the third appetite, and let's see what it has to do with self-discipline.
The habit of expressing loosely organized opinions is one of the most destructive of habits. Its destructiveness consists in its tendency to influence people to guess instead of searching for the facts when they form opinions, create ideas, or organize plans. The habit develops a grasshopper mind, one that jumps from one thing to another but never completes anything. And of course, carelessness in the expression of opinions leads to the habit of drifting. From there, it is only a step or two until one is bound by the law of hypnotic rhythm, which automatically prohibits accurate thinking.
What other disadvantages are there in free expression of opinions?
The person who talks too much informs the world of his aims and plans, and gives to others the opportunity to profit by his ideas. Wise men keep their plans to themselves and refrain from expressing uninvited opinions. This prevents others from appropriating their ideas and makes it difficult for others to interfere with their plans.
Why do so many people indulge in the habit of expressing uninvited opinions?
The habit is one way of expressing egotism and vanity. The desire for self-expression is inborn in people. The motive back of the habit is to attract the attention of others and to impress them favorably. Actually, it has just the opposite effect. When the self-invited speaker attracts attention, it usually is unfavorable.
Yes. What other disadvantages has the habit?
The person who insists on talking seldom has an opportunity to learn by listening to others.
But isn't it true that a magnetic speaker often puts himself in the way of opportunity to benefit himself by attracting the attention of others through his powers of oratory?
Yes, a magnetic orator does have an asset of tremendous value in his ability to impress people by his speech. But he cannot make the best use of this asset if he forces his speech on others without their invitation. No single quality adds more to one's personality than the ability to speak with emotional feeling, force, and conviction. But the speaker must not impose his speech upon others without being invited to do so. There is an old saying that nothing is worth more than its actual cost. This applies as well to the free, uninvited expression of opinions as to material things.
Sounds like a baby.
What about people who volunteer their opinions by
She'd be
expressing
happy
them
when
in
she
a
hear
letter?
her baby
Do they
cry,
also
but she
suffer
could
by
leave.
lack of self-discipline?
One of the worst pests on earth is the person who writes uninvited letters to
Could've
people
kept that
prominence.
energy.
Men in public office, moving picture stars, men who have succeeded in business or written a best-selling book. And people whose names appear often in the newspapers are continuously besieged by people who write letters expressing their opinion on all subjects.
But the writing of uninvited letters is a harmless way of finding pleasure through self-expression. Is
That's
it
them
not?
trolls
What
right there.
damage does
They've been
one
doing
do
that
by
shit
the
for
habit?
years.
Habits are contagious. Every habit attracts a flock of its relatives. The habit of doing anything that is useless leads
My
to the
life had
formation
ended
of other
soon the
habits that are
troll came
useless,
in. And I
especially
didn't
the
get to
habit of
see
drifting.
him like as soon as he came in, but I seen.
But that is not all the
Message.
dangers associated with the habit of indulging
Shit,
in
like,
uninvited expression of
You ain't supposed
opinions.
to be here.
The habit creates enemies and places in their hands dangerous weapons by which they may do great injury to the one who indulges in it. Thieves and confidence men and racketeers pay big prices for the names and addresses of the writers of uninvited letters. Knowing as they do, the writers of these letters become easy victims of all manner of schemes that result in the loss of their money. They refer to the writers of such letters as nuts. If you wish to know how foolish people are who write uninvited letters, read the nut column of any newspaper. The column in which the
Read the
paper
comment
publishes the
section
voluntary
of
opinions
any
of its
fucking
readers,
social
and you
media.
will see for yourself how the writers of such letters antagonize people and invite opposition from others.
Now, I had no idea, Your Majesty, that people get into so much difficulty through uninvited expression of their opinions. But now that you have brought up the subject, I do remember writing
Literally
the
the
editor of a
fucking troll
prominent
that came
magazine
in.
an uninvited letter of criticism, which cost me a fine position on his staff at a fat salary.
That is a perfect example. The proper place to begin self-discipline is right where you stand. The way to begin is by recognizing the truth, that there is nothing for good or
Fuck
evil
people's
throughout the
opinions.
myriads of universes except the power of natural law. There is no individual personality anywhere throughout the myriad of universes with the slightest power to influence a human being, save nature and human beings themselves. There is no human being now living. No human being has
Make sure
ever
you give this
lived,
video a
and no
thumbs
human
up.
being
I
ever
really
will
appreciate
live with the right or the power to deprive another human being of the inborn privilege of free and independent thought. That privilege is the only one over which any human being can have absolute control. No adult human being ever loses the right to freedom of thought, but most humans lose the benefits of this privilege either by neglect or because it has been taken away from them by their parents or religious instructors before the age of understanding. These are self-evident truths, no less important because they are being called to your attention by the devil than they would be if brought to your attention by my opposition.
But what are people going to lean upon in the hour of emergency when they know not where nor to whom to appeal?
Let them lean upon the only dependable power available to any human being.
And what is that?
Themselves. The power of their own thoughts. The only power they can control and may rely upon. The only power which cannot be perverted, colored, modified, or falsified by their dishonest fellow human beings.
All you say seems logical, but why must I come to the devil to discover such profound truths? Let's get back to the 7 principles. You've already disclosed enough information to show clearly that the secret of how to break the power of hypnotic rhythm is wrapped in the 7 principles. You have shown, too, that the most important of these principles is self-discipline. Now, go ahead and describe the other 5 principles you have not yet mentioned and indicate what part they play in giving one self-discipline.
First, let me summarize that part of my confession we have already covered. I have frankly told you that my 2 most effective devices for mastering human beings are the habit of drifting and the law of hypnotic rhythm. I have shown you that drifting is not a natural law, but a man-made habit which leads to man's submission to the law of hypnotic rhythm. The 7 principles are the media by which man may break the hold of hypnotic rhythm and take possession again of his own mind. You see, therefore, the 7 principles are the 7 steps which lead victims of hypnotic rhythm out of the self-made prisons in which they are bound.
The 7 principles are the master key that unlocks the door to spiritual, mental, and economic
Hey, shout out to my
self-determination.
brother in
Is that true?
alive.
Yes,
Hey, shout
that's
out.
another way of stating the truth.
Is failure ever a benefit
One
to
of the
man?
best books for
Yes,
sure.
indeed, learning from adversity is the 3rd of the
Hey,
7
what the
principles. But few people know
gotta
that
pause the
every
book right
adversity brings with it the seed.
It was a dude, like, I just had to end the first live. Like, and it was a guy who was commenting, and his name was Anthony, and I was talking about you. And I was like, man, I gotta go see my brother tomorrow. I just gotta remind myself. But for you to pop up in the live, like, of course I'm gonna remember to just go tomorrow. But still, like, that thought had popped up because the guy's name was Anthony. I'm like, hey, that's my brother name. And now you in the chat. So shout out to my brother. Go subscribe to his channel. Definitely subscribe to his music channel. Go listen to it. Music is fire. Hey, some 2022 is about to be crazy. Watch.
An equivalent advantage. Still fewer people know the difference between temporary defeat and failure. If this knowledge were generally known, I would be deprived of one of my strongest weapons of control over human beings.
But I understood you to say that failure is one of your greatest allies. I got the impression from your confession that failure causes people to lose ambition and quit trying, and then you take them over without opposition on their part.
That is just the point. I take them over after they quit trying. If they knew the difference between temporary defeat and failure, they would not quit when they meet with opposition from life. If they knew that every form of defeat and all failures bring with them the seed of unborn opportunity, they would keep on fighting and win. Success usually is but one short step beyond the point where one quits fighting.
Is that all one might learn from adversity, defeat, and failure?
No, that is the least of what one might learn. I hate to tell you this, but failure often serves as a blessing in disguise because it breaks the grip of hypnotic rhythm and frees the mind for a fresh start.
Now we're getting somewhere. So, you have confessed at long last that even nature's law of hypnotic rhythm can be, and often is, annulled by nature herself. Is that correct?
No, that is not stating the matter accurately. Nature never reverses any of her natural laws. Nature does not take away a human being's freedom of thought through hypnotic rhythm. The individual gives up his freedom by abuse of this law. If a man jumped from a tree and was killed by the sudden impact of his body with the earth, through the law of gravity, you wouldn't say nature murdered him, would you? You would say the man neglected to relate himself properly to the law of gravity.
I'm beginning to see. The law of hypnotic rhythm is capable of both negative and positive application. It may drag one down to slavery through loss of the privilege of freedom of thought, or it may help one rise to great heights of achievement through the free use of thought, depending on how the individual relates himself to the law. Is that correct?
Now you have it right.
But what about failure? One does not fail intentionally with purpose of forethought. No one encourages temporary defeat. These are circumstances over which the individual often has no control whatsoever. How, then, can it be said that nature does not take away one's freedom of thought when failure destroys ambition, willpower, and the self-confidence essential to make a fresh start?
Failure is a man-made circumstance. It is never real until it has been accepted by man as permanent. Stating it another way, failure is a state of mind. Therefore, it is something an individual can control until he neglects to exercise this privilege. Nature does not force people to fail, but nature does impose her law of hypnotic rhythm upon all minds, and through this law gives permanency to the thoughts which dominate those minds. In other words, failure thoughts are taken over by the law of hypnotic rhythm and made permanent if the individual accepts any circumstances as being permanent failure. That same law just as readily takes over and makes permanent thoughts of success.
What part, then, does failure play in helping an individual break the grip of hypnotic rhythm after that law has been fastened upon his mind?
Failure brings a climax in which one has the privilege of clearing his mind of fear and making a new start in another direction. Failure proves conclusively that something is wrong with one's aims or the plans by which the object of these aims is sought. Failure is the dead end of the habit path one has been following, and when it is reached, it forces one to leave that path and take up another, thereby creating a new rhythm. But failure does more than this. It gives an individual an opportunity to test himself, wherein he may learn how much willpower he possesses. Failure also forces people to learn many truths they would never discover without it. Failure often leads an individual to an understanding of the power of self-discipline, without which no one could turn back after having once been the victim of hypnotic rhythm. Study the lives of all people who achieve outstanding success in any calling, and observe with profit that their success is usually an exact ratio to their experiences of defeat before succeeding.
Is this all you have to say of the advantages of failure?
No, I have barely begun. If you want the real significance of adversity, failure, defeat, and all other experiences which break up a human being's habits and force him to form new habits, watch nature at her work. Nature uses illness to break the physical rhythm of the body when the cells and organs become improperly related. She uses economic depressions to break the rhythm of mass thought when great numbers of people become improperly related, through business, social, and political activities. And she uses failure to break the rhythm of negative thought when an individual becomes improperly related to himself in his own mind. Observe carefully, and you will see that everywhere in nature there is always at work a natural law, which gives eternal change to all matter, all energy, and to the power of thought. The only permanent thing in the universe is change. Eternal, inexorable change, through which every atom of matter and every unit of energy has the opportunity to properly relate itself to all other units of matter and energy, And every human being has the opportunity and the privilege of properly relating himself to all other human beings, no matter how many mistakes he makes, or how many times or in what ways he may be defeated. When mass failure overtakes a nation, such as the 1929 World Business Depression, the circumstance is in perfect harmony with nature's plan to break up man's habits and give out fresh opportunities.
What you are saying intrigues me. Am I to understand that hypnotic rhythm has something to do with the way people relate themselves to one another?
That abstract, elusive thing called character is nothing but a manifestation of the law of hypnotic rhythm. Therefore, when speaking of one's character, it would be proper to say his thought habits have been crystallized into a positive or a negative personality. Through hypnotic rhythm, one is good or bad because of the knitting together of his thoughts and deeds through hypnotic rhythm. One is bound by poverty or blessed with abundance because his aims, plans, and desires, or lack of them, have been made permanent and real by hypnotic rhythm.
Is that all you have to say of the connection between hypnotic rhythm and human relationships?
No, I have just begun. Remember, while I am talking, I am speaking of the influence of hypnotic rhythm in connection with all human relationships. Men who succeed in business do so entirely because of the way they relate themselves to their associates and to others outside of the business. Professional men who succeed do so largely because of the manner in which they relate themselves to their clients. It is much more important for the lawyer to know people and to know the laws of nature than it is to know the law. And the doctor is a failure before he starts unless he knows how to relate himself to his patients so as to establish their faith in him. Marriage succeeds or fails entirely because of the manner in which the participants relate themselves to one another. Proper relationship in marriage begins with a proper motive for the marriage. Most marriages do not bring happiness because the contracting parties neither understand nor attempt to understand the law of hypnotic rhythm, through the operation of which every word they speak, every act in which they engage, and every motive by which they are inspired to deal with each other is picked up and woven into a web that entangles them in controversial misery, or gives to them the wings of freedom through which they soar above all forms of unhappiness. Every newly made acquaintanceship between people ripens into friendship and then into spiritual harmony, sometimes called love, or plants a germ of suspicion and doubt which evolves and grows into open rebellion, according to the way in which the participants in the acquaintanceship relate themselves to one another. Hypnotic rhythm picks up the dominating motives, aims, purposes,
By
and
the way, I'm
feelings of
reading
the
the book on the
contacting
screen,
minds
so
and weaves these
I'm
into
staring
some
at the
degree of
screen.
faith or fear, love or hatred. After the pattern has taken definite shape, as it does with time, it is forced upon the contacting minds and made a part thereof. In this silent way does nature make permanent the dominating factors of every human relationship. In every human relationship, the evil motives and the evil deeds of the contacting individuals are coordinated and consolidated into definite form and subtly woven into that all-important human trait known as character. In the same manner, the motives and the deeds of good are consolidated and forced upon the individual. You see, therefore, it is not only one's deeds, but also one's very thoughts which determine the nature of all human relationships.
You are leading into pretty deep water. Let's keep it near the shore, where I can follow you without fear of getting beyond a safe depth. Go ahead and tell me how this subject of human relationships actually works in the current affairs of a problem-filled world such as we have today.
That is a happy thought. But let me make sure you understand the principles I am telling about before I try to show you how to apply them in the affairs of life. I wish to be sure you understand that the law of hypnotic rhythm is something that no one can control, influence, or evade. But everyone can relate himself to this law so as to benefit by its inexorable operation. Harmonious relationship with the law consists entirely of the individual changing his habits so they represent the circumstances and the things the individual wants and is willing to accept. No one can change the law of hypnotic rhythm any more than one can change the law of gravity, but everyone can change himself. Remember, therefore, in all the discussion of this subject, that all human relationships are made and maintained by the habits of the individuals related. The law of hypnotic rhythm plays only the part of solidifying the factors which constitute human relationships, but it does not create those factors. Before we go further with the discussion of human relationships, I want you to get a clear understanding of the subconscious mind. The term subconscious mind represents a hypothetical physical organ which has no actual existence. The mind of man consists of universal energy, some call it infinite intelligence, which the individual receives, appropriates, and organizes in definite thought forms through the network of intricate physical apparatus known as a brain. These thought forms are replicas of various stimuli which reach the brain through the 5 commonly known physical senses, and the 6th sense, which is not so well known. When any form of stimuli reaches the brain and takes the definite shape of thought, it is classified and stored away in a group of the brain cells known as the memory group. All thoughts of a similar nature are stored together, so that the bringing forth of one leads to easy contact with all its associates. The system is very similar to the modern office filing cabinet, and it is operated in a similar manner. The thought impressions with which one mixes the greatest amount of emotion, or feeling, are the dominating factors of the brain, because they are always near the surface, at the top of the filing system, so to speak, where they spring into action voluntarily the moment an individual neglects to exercise self-discipline. These emotion-laden thoughts are so powerful, they often cause an individual to rush into action and indulge in deeds which have not been submitted to or approved by his reasoning faculty. These emotional outbursts usually destroy harmony in all human relationships. The brain often brings together combinations of emotional feelings so powerful they completely set aside the control of the reasoning faculty. On all such occasions, human relationships are apt to be lacking in harmony. Through the operation of the 6th sense, the brain of a human being may contact the filing cabinet of other brains and inspect at will whatever thought impressions are on file there. The condition under which one person may contact and inspect the filing cabinet of another person's brain is generally known as harmony. But you may better understand what is meant if I say brains attuned to the same rate of thought vibrations can easily and quickly exercise the privilege of entering and inspecting each other's filing cabinets of thoughts.
He trying to speak in code, like he trying to tell you like you can tap into other people's thoughts and like their brain, like once you get in tune. But the way he's explaining it, like it's like he's trying to go over people's head. He hoping people don't understand like what he's trying to say. But I get it.
In addition to receiving organized thoughts from the filing cabinets of other brains through the 6th sense, one can, through this same physical organ, contact and receive information from the universal storehouse known as infinite intelligence. All information reaching one's brain through the 6th sense comes from sources not easily isolated or traced. Therefore, this sort of information is generally believed to come from one's subconscious mind. The 6th sense is the organ of the brain through which one receives all information, all knowledge, all thought impressions which do not come through one or more of the 5 physical senses. Now that you understand how the mind operates, you will more easily understand how and why people come to grief through improper human relationships. You will also understand how human relationship may be made to yield riches in their highest form, riches in material, mental, and spiritual estates. Moreover, you will understand there can never be happiness except through understanding and application of the right principles of human relationships. You will understand, too, that no individual is an entity unto himself, that completeness of mind can be attained only by harmony of purpose and deed between 2 or more minds. You will understand why every human being should, of his own choice, become his brother's keeper in fact, as well as in theory.
What you say may be true, but I still insist that you have me beyond safe depths of thought. Let us get back nearer to the shore, where I can wade in familiar water. We shall go out into the deeper water after we learn to swim well. We started out to discuss the subject of how to
told you he was
profit by
trying to go over his
adversity,
head.
but it seems we have drifted somewhat afield from that subject.
We have detoured, but we have not drifted. The devil never drifts. The detour was necessary in order that you might be prepared to understand the most important part of this entire interview. We are now ready to get back to the discussion of the subject of adversity. Inasmuch as most adversities grow out of improper relationships between people, it seems important to understand how people may become properly related. Naturally, the question arises as to what is a proper relationship between people. The answer is that the proper relationship is one that brings to all connected with it or affected by it some form of benefit.
What then is an improper relationship?
Any relationship between people which damages anyone or brings any form of misery or unhappiness to any of the individuals.
How can improper relationships be corrected?
By change of mind of the person causing the improper relationship, or by changing the persons to the relationship. Some minds harmonize naturally, while others just as naturally clash. Successful human relationships, to endure as such, must be formed of minds that naturally harmonize, quite aside from the question of having common interests as a means of bringing them into harmony. When you speak of business leaders who succeed because they know how to pick men, you might more correctly say they succeed because they know how to associate minds which harmonize naturally.
Knocking at the door.
Knowing how to pick people successfully for any definite purpose in life is based upon ability to recognize the types of people whose minds naturally harmonize.
Stay focused on adversity, if you will. If there are possible benefits to be found through adversity, name some of them.
Adversity relieves people of vanity and egotism. It discourages selfishness by proving that no one can succeed without the cooperation of others. Adversity forces an individual to test his mental, physical, and spiritual strength. It thus brings him face to face with his weaknesses and gives him the opportunity to bridge them. Adversity forces one to seek ways and means to definite ends by meditation and introspective thought. This often leads to the discovery and use of the sixth sense through which one may communicate with infinite intelligence. Adversity forces one to recognize the need for intelligence not available except from sources outside of one's own mind. Adversity breaks old habits of thought and gives one an opportunity to form new habits. Therefore, it may serve to break the hold of hypnotic rhythm and change its operation from negative to positive ends.
What is the greatest benefit one may receive through adversity?
The greatest benefit of adversity is that it may, and generally does, force one to change one's thought habits, thus breaking and redirecting the force of hypnotic rhythm.
In other words, failure always is a blessing when it forces one to acquire knowledge or to build habits that lead to the achievement of one's major purpose in life. Is that correct?
Yes, and something more. Failure is a blessing when it forces one to depend less upon material forces and more upon spiritual forces. Many human beings discover their other selves, the forces which operate through the power of thought, only after some catastrophe deprives them of the full and free use of their physical bodies. When a man can no longer use his hands and his feet, he usually begins to use his brain. Thus he puts himself in the way of discovering the power of his own mind.
What benefits may be derived from the loss of material things, money, for example?
The loss of material things may teach many needed lessons, none greater, however, than the truth that man has control over nothing and has no assurance of the permanent use of anything except his own power of thought.
I wonder if this is not the greatest benefit available through adversity.
No. The greatest potential benefit of any circumstance which causes one to make a fresh start is that it provides an opportunity to break the grip of hypnotic rhythm and set up a new set of thought habits. New habits offer the only way out for people who fail. Most people who escape from the negative to the positive operation of the law of hypnotic rhythm do so only because of some form of adversity which forces them to change their thought habits.
Isn't adversity apt to break one's self-reliance and cause one to give up hope?
It has that effect on those whose willpower is weak through long-established habits of drifting. It has the opposite effect on those who have not been weakened through drifting. The non-drifter meets with temporary defeat and failure, but his reaction to all forms of adversity is positive. He fights instead of giving up, and usually wins. Life gives no one immunity against adversity, but life gives to everyone the power of positive thought, which is sufficient to master all circumstances of adversity and convert them into benefits. The individual is left with the privilege of using or neglecting to use his prerogative right to think his way through all adversities. Every individual is forced either to use his thought power for the attainment of definite positive ends, or by neglect or design, use this power for the attainment of negative ends. There can be no compromise, no refusal to use the mind. The law of hypnotic rhythm forces every individual to give some degree of use, either negative or positive, to his mind. But it does not influence the individual as to which use he will make of his mind.
Am I to understand from what you say that every adversity is a blessing?
No, I did not say that. I said there is the seed of an equivalent advantage in every adversity. I did not say there was the full-blown flower of advantage, just the seed. Usually the seed consists of some form of knowledge, some idea or plan, or some opportunity which would not have been available except through the change of thought habits forced by the adversity.
Are those all the benefits available to human beings through failure?
No. Failure is used by nature as a common language in which she chastises people when they neglect to adapt themselves to her laws. For example, the World War was man-made and destructive. Nature planted in the circumstances of the war the seed of an equivalent reprimand in the form of a world depression. The depression was inevitable and inescapable. It followed the war as naturally as day follows night, and by the operation of the selfsame law, the law of hypnotic rhythm.
Am I to understand that the law of hypnotic rhythm is the same as that which Ralph Waldo Emerson called the law of compensation?
He's
The
a
law
great
of
author as
hypnotic
well.
rhythm is the law of compensation. It is the power with which nature balances negative and positive forces throughout the universes, in all forms of energy, in all forms of matter, and in all human relationships.
Does the law of hypnotic rhythm operate quickly in all instances? For example, does this law immediately bless one with the benefits of positive application of thoughts, or curse one immediately with the results of negative thoughts?
The law operates definitely, but not always swiftly. Both the benefits and the penalties incurred through the law by individuals may be harvested by others, either before or after their death. Observe how this law works by forcing upon one generation of people the effects of both the sins and the virtues of preceding generations. In the operation of all of nature's laws, the fourth dimension, time, is an inexorable factor. The length of time consumed by nature in the relation of effects to their causes depends in every instance on the circumstances at hand. Nature grows a pumpkin in 3 months. A good-sized oak tree requires 100 years. She converts a hen's egg into a chicken in 4 weeks, but she requires 9 months to convert the egg of a human being into an individual.
I now have a better understanding of the potentialities of adversity and failure. You may go ahead now with your description of the next of the 7 principles. What is your next principle?
The next principle is environmental influence.
Go ahead and describe the working principle of environmental influences as a determining factor in human destinies.
Environment consists of all the mental, spiritual, and physical forces which affect and influence human beings.
What connection, if any, is there between environmental influences and hypnotic rhythm?
Hypnotic rhythm solidifies and makes permanent the thought habits of human beings. Thought habits are stimulated by environmental influences. In other words, the material on which thoughts are fed comes from one's environment. Thought habits are made permanent by hypnotic rhythm.
What is the most important part of one's environment? The part which determines, more than all others, whether an individual makes positive or negative use of his mind?
The most important part of one's environment is that created by his association with others. All people absorb and take over, either consciously or unconsciously, the thought habits of those with whom they associate closely.
Do you mean by this that constant association with a person whose thought habits are negative influences one to form negative thought habits?
Yes. The law of hypnotic rhythm forces every human being to form thought habits which harmonize with the dominating influences of his environment, particularly that part of his environment created by his association with other minds.
Then it is important that one select one's close associates with great care.
Yes. One's intimate associates should be chosen with as much care as one chooses the food with which he feeds his body, with the object always of associating with people whose dominating thoughts are positive, friendly, and harmonious.
Which class of associates has the greatest influence upon one?
One's partner in marriage and in the home, and one's associates in his occupation. After that come close friends and acquaintances. Casual acquaintances and strangers have little influence on one.
Why does one's partner in marriage have so great an influence upon one's mind?
Because the relationship of marriage brings people under the influence of spiritual forces of such weight that they become dominating forces of the mind.
How may environmental influences
Yo, like I've been married twice. I'm in my second marriage. The first marriage that I was in when joined the Marines, I got married at 2 days before I turned 21. I ain't gonna say it was the worst thing that I ever did. It was the worst decision I ever made because like everything happens for a reason. But like that showed me once I look back on life how like the woman you choose to be your partner could truly be a gift or a curse. So that taught me a lot of lessons. And then just why I was like, man, I ain't even gonna lie. The only reason I started dating her was on MySpace. She had this dress on and like she had a nice shape to her. So being a teenager at the time when I met her, like that's all I was focusing on. And she it was a blue dress, so now that I look back, I'm like, that was the devil in a blue dress. Like I seen the red flags, but I ignored the motherfuckers. But I learned my lessons. So now the woman that's with me, like she helps me grow. She helps me evolve definitely spiritually. So man, it's a big difference.
is to break the grip of hypnotic rhythm?
All influences which establish thought habits are given permanency through the law of hypnotic rhythm. One may change the influences of his environment so that the dominating influences are either positive or negative, and the law of hypnotic rhythm will make them permanent unless they are changed through one's habits of thought.
Stating this truth in another way, one may submit himself to any environmental influence desired, whether positive or negative, and the law of hypnotic rhythm will make the influence permanent when it assumes the magnitude of thought habit. Is that the way the law works?
That is correct. Be careful of all forces which inspire thought. Those are the forces which constitute environment and determine the nature of one's earthly destiny.
What class of people controls their environmental influences?
The non-drifters. All who are victims of the habit of drifting forfeit their power to choose their own environment. They become the victims of every negative influence of their environment.
Is there no way out for the drifter? Is there no method by which he may submit himself to the influence of a positive environment?
Yes, there is a way out for drifters. They can stop drifting, take possession of their own minds, and choose an environment which inspires positive thought. This they may accomplish through definiteness of purpose.
Is
I
that
had
all
to
there is to
move.
the act of eliminating the
Once I moved from North Carolina and then back home to Gary, and then once I left Gary and moved to Vegas, like I don't know, there's something about Vegas that just made me wake up, and it made me like just hustle harder, make me grind harder. It made me tap into these books because I wasn't reading these books when I was living in Gary, Indiana, and I damn sure wasn't reading these books in the military. I was reading books like Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, like different books like that. But I wasn't reading books that can help my mind evolve and grow. Like so, now, I mean, once I moved to Vegas, all of that changed. It's like, oh, I really became an adult. I really started like taking care of my responsibilities. Like shit. Now I got custody of six of my kids. I mean, I take care of six of my children, and the only my oldest lives with his mom, and he's well taken care. I take care of him. Like, damn, I talk to him every single day. Like, so it's like I'm in the household, but I'm not physically in the house. Like, so he gets the same treatment as all my other kids, but I just got custody of six. So they made me focus harder. They made me like, even though kids can be a distraction, like I said before, like my kids made motivates me to like get more for myself. Like, cause a regular 9 to 5 ain't paying me to support my family. So I gotta do way more. I can't just settle for, uh, I can't settle for nothing. Like, but life has been working out for me, so I can't complain. I'm glad I made the decision I did. Glad I read the books I did. Glad I persevered through all the struggles, through all the failures, through all like the negative thoughts, all of that shit. I overcame it. So everybody else can
drifting?
too.
Is the habit only a state of mind?
Drifting is nothing but a negative state of mind, a state of mind conspicuous by its emptiness of purpose.
What effective procedure may one follow in establishing an environment most helpful in developing and maintaining positive thought habits?
The most effective of all environments is that which may be created by a friendly alliance of a group of people who will obligate themselves to assist one another in achieving the object of some definite purpose. This sort of an alliance is known as a mastermind. Through its operation, one may associate himself with carefully chosen individuals, each of whom brings to the alliance some knowledge, experience, education, plan, or idea suited to his needs in carrying out the object of his definite purpose. The most successful leaders in all walks of life avail themselves of this sort of made-to-order environmental influence. Outstanding achievement is impossible without the friendly cooperation of others. Stating the truth in another way, successful people must control their environment, thereby ensuring themselves against the influence of a negative environment.
What of people whose duty to relatives makes it impossible for them to avoid the influence of a negative environment?
No human being owes another any degree of duty which robs him of his privilege of building his thought habits in a positive environment. On the other hand, every human being is duty-bound to himself to remove from his environment every influence which even remotely tends to develop negative thought habits.
Isn't this a cold-blooded philosophy?
Only the
On
strongest
you to
survive.
like fix your mindset.
No one can be strong
Nobody
without
else.
removing himself from all influences which develop negative thought habits. Negative thought habits result in the loss of the privilege of self-determination, no matter what or who may cause those habits. Positive thought habits may be controlled by the individual and made to serve his aims and purposes. Negative thought habits control the individual and deprive him of the privilege of self-determination.
I deduce from all you've said that those who control the environmental influences out of which their thought habits are built are masters of their earthly destinies, and that all others are mastered by earthly destinies. Is that stating the matter correctly?
Perfectly stated.
What establishes one's thought habits?
All habits are established because of inherent or acquired desires or motives. That is, habits are begun as the result of some form of
Make sure
definite
y'all
desire.
give this video a
What
thumbs
takes
up if
place
you
in the
haven't
physical
already.
brain
Really
while one is
appreciate it.
forming thought habits?
Desires are organized
Definitely hit that
impulses of
subscribe
energy
button if you
called
haven't
thoughts.
already.
Desires that are mixed with emotional feeling magnetize the brain cells in which they are stored and prepare those cells to be taken over and directed by the law of hypnotic rhythm. When any thought appears in the brain or is created there, and is mixed with keen emotional feeling of desire, the law of hypnotic rhythm begins at once to translate it into its physical counterpart. Dominating thoughts, which are acted upon first by the law of hypnotic rhythm, are those with which are mixed the strongest desires and the most intense feelings. Thought habits are established by the repetition of the same thoughts.
What are the most impelling basic motives or desires which inspire thought action?
The 10 most common motives, those which inspire most of one's physical action, are these: the desire for sex expression and love, the desire for physical food, the desire for spiritual, mental, and physical self-expression, the desire for perpetuation of life after death, the desire for power over others, the desire for material wealth, the desire for knowledge, the desire to imitate others, the desire to excel others, the 7 basic fears. These are the dominating motives which inspire the majority of all human endeavors.
What about the negative desires, such as greed, envy, avarice, jealousy, anger? Are these not expressed more often than any of the positive desires?
All negative desires are nothing but frustrations of positive desires. They are inspired by some form of defeat, failure, or neglect by human beings to adapt themselves to nature's laws in a positive way.
That's a new slant on the subject of negative thoughts. If I correctly understand what you have said, all negative thoughts are inspired by one's neglect or failure to adapt oneself harmoniously to nature's laws. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct.
It's like when you teach a person about the law of attraction and then they learn about it and it don't work out for them. Then they just do the opposite of that. That's what I'm getting from this book.
Nature will not tolerate idleness or vacuums of any sort. All space must be and is filled with something. Everything in existence, of both a physical and a spiritual nature, must be and is constantly in motion. The human brain is no exception. It was created to receive, organize, specialize, and express the power of thought. When the individual does not use...
back to the what I had just said. It was like when I was a Christian, right? And like once left North Carolina, decided I wasn't gonna go to church because I felt like it wasn't working for me. So I decided to go do the complete opposite. Like, that's how I came into introduced to books like Napoleon Hill, Interview with the Devil. Like before, when I was a Christian, I'd have never read that book because I'd have been like, that's some, that ain't. I ain't trying to read that. That's the devil stuff. But that was because of my level of understanding, my level of thinking. So I went way outside of the box, or way outside of what I was taught, or how I was raised, to like just get a level of understanding for myself, because there was a lot of stuff in church that didn't make sense, and nobody was really giving me the answers I needed, and there wasn't no true leaders that I seen in the church. So I'm like, man, I need to go out, like search for the answers for myself, and I found them. So
Brain for the expression of positive creative thoughts. Nature fills the vacuum by forcing the brain to act upon
I
negative
wasn't
thoughts.
creative at all when
There
I was
can
in
be
church. I ain't
no
even gonna lie.
idleness in the brain. Understand this principle, and you will come into a new and important understanding of the part environmental influences take in the lives of human beings. You will better understand also how the law of hypnotic rhythm operates, it being the law which keeps
My
everything in.
bad for keep pausing it, but when I was a Christian, I was living to die and go to try to die and go to heaven. It was like I wasn't trying to do nothing wrong. Like I wasn't trying to do nothing but live and to die and go to the quote unquote heaven in the Bible. Like I wasn't even trying to have heaven on earth for myself at first. Cause I'm like, well, you ain't supposed to have heaven on earth. That's wrong. Like that's bad. Like that's the intention. That's the thoughts that I had about rich people and all of that. Now I'm on a journey to becoming somebody wealthy of myself. I'm like, oh shit, I understand both sides of the coin now. But at first, I was broke and I was like okay with it. I was content because I'm like, I'm just trying to make it to heaven. Like, and thinking, I'm like, damn, like I was in my early 20s thinking like that. If I had to stay like that, just imagine 60 years of living in poverty, like just hoping when I die I get to go to heaven, like just hoping I live my life right enough, like I was saved enough that once I got to the gate, Peter said my name was in the book of the Bible or whatever the book is. But now I'm like, the fuck I'm waiting for that shit for? I can create my own heaven, and when I die, I'm not subject to even just go to that heaven. My mind can take me to anywhere I want to go into the universe. Like so, I'm not stuck on Earth. I don't have to reincarnate. I don't have. Ain't no hell for me. Like shit in the heaven that I don't. I'm not. Bro, when I first was in church, I used to learn about heaven. They used to say it's gonna be like gospel songs 24/7, 7 days a week, milk and honey. You can live in a mansion like gold and everything. And I'm like, man, I'm lactose intolerant. Like I would just think like that. Like it ain't gonna work for me. And plus, I like church music, but not 24/7. I like rap too. Like I like R&B too. Like heaven didn't seem like a place I would want to spend eternity knowing like how my mind works, how imagination works, like how I can think everything into existence. So I can think whatever reality I want into my life. And that's what I plan on doing. Like living my life out to the fullest while I'm here. Like leaving my footprint, leaving my stamps, and like just exiting out this motherfucker.
One constantly moving through some form of expression of either negative or positive principles. Nature is not interested in morals as such. She is not interested in right and wrong. She is not interested in justice and injustice. She is interested only in forcing everything to express action according to its nature.
That is an enlightening interpretation of nature's ways. To whom may I turn for corroboration of your claims?
To men of science, to the philosophers, to all accurate thinkers. Lastly, to the physical manifestations of nature herself. Nature has no such thing as dead matter. Every atom of matter is constantly in a state of motion. All energy is constantly in motion. There are no dead voids anywhere. Time and space are literally manifestations of motion of such swiftness that it cannot be measured by human beings.
Alas, one is forced to the conclusion from what you say that the sources of dependable knowledge are shockingly limited.
The developed sources of knowledge are limited. Every normal adult human brain is a potential gateway to all the knowledge there is throughout the universes. Every normal adult brain has within its mechanism the possibility of direct communication with infinite intelligence, wherein exists all the knowledge that is or can ever be.
Your statement leads me to believe that human beings may become all they have attributed to what they call God. Is that what you mean?
Through the law of evolution, the human brain is being perfected to communicate at will with infinite intelligence. The perfection will come through organized development of the brain, through its adaptation to nature's laws. Time is the factor which will bring perfection.
What causes cycles of recurring events such as epidemics of disease, business depressions, wars, and crime waves?
All such epidemics in which great numbers of people are similarly affected are caused by the law of hypnotic rhythm, through which nature consolidates thoughts of a similar nature and causes those thoughts to be expressed through mass action.
Then the Great Depression was put into motion because great numbers of people were influenced to release thoughts of fear. Is that correct?
Perfectly. Millions of people were endeavoring to get something for nothing through stock gambling. When they suddenly discovered they had gotten nothing for something, they became frightened, rushed to their banks to draw out their balances, and the panic was on. Through mass thought of millions of minds, all thinking in terms of fear of poverty, the depression was prolonged over a period of years.
And those is powerful people.
From what
who
you
had
say,
money,
I
too.
deduce that nature consolidates the dominating thoughts of people and expresses these thoughts through some form of mass action, such as business depressions, business booms, and so on. Is that correct?
You are
But if you know Napoleon Hill, like he only talked to in his book Think and Grow Rich, he only talked to the people who survived the Great Depression, like who thrived in the Great Depression. He wasn't interested in the people who lost money. Like he wasn't interested in none of them niggas. He was interested in the Rockefellers, the fucking like I said, he worked for Andrew Carnegie, who was one of the richest men in the world. Like so, Thomas Edison, like those was the people he was talking to. Like he wasn't talking to no broke people. Like so, these books that he's given, that he written, like these was books that will prepare you for anything, whether it's a depression, whether it's the stock market going down, crypto crashing, things ain't going right. These books train you to like go through all of that shit. So that's why I love them so much. Shout
right
out
here.
to
Let us
Napoleon.
now take up the next of the 7 principles. Go ahead and describe it.
The next principle is time, the 4th dimension.
What relationship is there between time and the operation of the law of hypnotic rhythm?
Time is the law of hypnotic rhythm. The lapse of time required to give permanency to thought habits depends upon the object and the nature of the thoughts.
But I understood you to say that the only enduring thing in nature is change. If that is true, then time is constantly changing, rearranging, and recombining all things, including one's thought habits. How then could the law of hypnotic rhythm give permanency to one's thought habits?
Time divides all thought habits into 2 classes, negative thoughts and positive thoughts. One's individual thoughts are, of course, constantly changing and being recombined to suit the individual's desires. But thoughts do not change from negative to positive, or vice versa, except through voluntary effort on the part of the individual. Time penalizes the individual for all negative thoughts and rewards him for all positive thoughts, according to the nature and purpose of the thoughts. If one's dominating thoughts are negative, time penalizes the individual by building in his mind the habit of negative thinking, and then proceeds to solidify this habit into permanency every second of its existence. Positive thoughts are, likewise, woven by time into permanent habits. The term permanency, of course, refers to the natural life of the individual. In the strict sense of the term, nothing is permanent. Time converts thought habits into what might be called permanency during the life of the individual.
Now I have a better understanding of how time works. What other characteristics has time in connection with the earthly destiny of human beings?
Time is nature's seasoning influence through which human experience may be ripened into
That's why it's
wisdom.
important to
People are not born
always
with wisdom,
practice
but they
positive
are
thinking.
born with the capacity to think,
You don't.
and they
You
may,
slip up and just
through the
start going
lapse of
back
time,
backwards. You're going to
think
come
their
back
way
negative.
into
Start
wisdom.
back thinking negative.
Do youths ever possess wisdom?
Only in very elementary matters. Wisdom comes only through the lapse of time. It cannot be inherited, and it cannot be imparted from one person to another except through the lapse of time.
Does the lapse of time force an individual to acquire wisdom?
No. Wisdom comes only to non-drifters who form positive thought habits as a dominating force in their lives. Drifters and those whose dominating thoughts are negative never acquire wisdom, except of a very elementary nature.
From what you say, I infer that time is the friend of the person who trains his mind to follow positive thought habits, and the enemy of the person who drifts into negative thought habits. Is that correct?
That is precisely true. All people can be classified as drifters and non-drifters. Drifters are always at the mercy of the non-drifters, and time makes this relationship permanent.
Do you mean that if I drift along through life without definite aim or purpose, the non-drifter may become my master, and time only serves to give the non-drifter a stronger and more permanent grip upon me?
That is stating the truth exactly.
What is wisdom?
Wisdom is the ability to relate yourself to nature's laws so as to make them serve you, and the ability to relate yourself to other people so as to gain their harmonious, willing cooperation in helping you to make life yield whatever you demand of it.
Then accumulated knowledge is not wisdom.
Great heavens, no. If knowledge were wisdom, the achievements of science would not have been converted into implements of destruction.
What is needed to convert knowledge into wisdom?
Time, plus the desire for wisdom. Wisdom is never thrust upon one. It is acquired, if at all, by positive thinking, through voluntary effort.
And that's
Is it
always been my
safe for
goal.
all people to have knowledge?
Wisdom.
It is never safe for anyone to have extensive knowledge without wisdom.
What is the age at which most people who acquire wisdom begin to acquire it?
The majority of people who acquire wisdom do so after they have passed the age of 40. Prior to that
I'm
time,
only
the majority
31.
of people are too busy gathering knowledge and organizing it into plans to spend any effort seeking wisdom.
What circumstance of life is most apt to lead one to acquire wisdom?
Adversity and failure. These are nature's universal languages through which she imparts wisdom to those who are ready to receive it.
Do adversity and failure always bring wisdom?
No, only to those who are ready for wisdom and have voluntarily sought it.
What determines one's readiness to receive wisdom?
Time and the nature of one's thought habits.
Is newly acquired knowledge the same as time-tested knowledge?
No. Knowledge tested through the lapse of time always is superior to that which has been newly acquired. Time gives to knowledge definiteness in both quality and quantity, and dependability. One can never be sure of knowledge that has not been tested.
What is dependable knowledge?
It is knowledge which harmonizes with natural law, which means that it is based upon positive thought.
Does time modify and alter the values of knowledge?
Yes, time modifies and alters all values. That which is accurate knowledge today may become null and void tomorrow because of time's rearrangement of facts and values. Time modifies all human relationships for better or for worse, depending upon the policy through which people relate themselves to one another. In the realm of thought, there is a time when it is proper to sow the seeds of thought, and there is a proper time to reap the harvest of those thoughts, the same as there is a time to sow and a time to reap from the soil of the earth. Without the proper measurement of time between the sowing and the reaping, nature modifies or withholds the rewards of the sowing.
Go ahead now and describe the last two of the 7 principles.
The next principle is harmony. Throughout nature, one may find evidences that all natural law moves in an orderly manner, through the law of harmony. Through the operation of this law, nature forces everything within the range of a given environment to become harmoniously related. Understand this truth, and you will catch a new and a more intriguing vision of the power of environment. You will understand why association with negative minds is fatal to those seeking self-determination.
Do you mean that nature voluntarily forces human beings to harmonize with the influences of their environment?
Yes, that is true. The law of hypnotic rhythm forces upon every living thing the dominating influences of the environment in which it exists.
If nature forces human beings to take on the nature of the environment in which they live, what means of escape are available to people who find themselves in an environment of poverty and failure, but desire to escape?
They must change their environment or remain poverty-stricken. Nature permits no one to escape the influences of his environment. However, nature, in her abundance of wisdom, has given to every normal human being the privilege of establishing his own mental, spiritual, and physical environment. But once he establishes it, he must become a part of it. This is the inexorable working of the law of harmony.
In a business association, for example, who establishes the dominating influence that determines the rhythm of the environment?
The individual or individuals who think and act with definiteness of purpose.
Is it as simple as that?
Yes. Definiteness of purpose is the starting point from which an individual may establish his own environment.
I do not seem to follow your reasoning. The entire world is torn with warfare and business depressions and other forms of strife which represent about everything except harmony. Nature does not seem to be forcing people to harmonize with one another. How do you explain this inconsistency?
There is no inconsistency. The dominating influences of the world are, as you say, negative. Very well, nature is forcing human beings to harmonize with the dominating influences of the world environment. Manifestations of harmony may be either positive or negative. For example, a group of men in prison may, and they generally do, think and act in a negative manner. But nature sees to it that the dominating influence of the prison is impressed upon every individual in it. A group of poverty-stricken people in a tenement house may fight among themselves and apparently resist all forms of harmony. But nature forces each of them to become a part of the dominating influence of the house in which they live. Harmony, in the sense it is here used, means that nature relates everything throughout the universe as to every other thing of a similar nature. Negative influences are forced into association with one another, no matter where they may be. Positive influences are just as definitely forced into association with one another.
I'm beginning to see why successful business leaders are so careful in the choice of their business associates. Men who succeed in any calling usually establish their own environment by surrounding themselves with people who think and act in terms of success. Is that the idea?
That is the idea exactly.
The circle is very
Observe
important.
with profit that the one thing all successful men insist upon is harmony among their business associates. Another trait of successful people is that they move with definiteness of purpose and insist upon their associates doing the same. Understand these two truths, and you understand the major difference between a Henry Ford and a day laborer.
Now, tell me about the last of the 7 principles.
The last principle is caution. Next to the habit of drifting, the most dangerous human trait is the lack of caution. People drift into all sorts of hazardous circumstances because they do not exercise caution by planning the moves they make. The drifter always moves without exercising caution. He acts first and thinks later, if at all. He does not choose his friends. He drifts along and allows people to attach themselves to him on their own terms. He does not choose an occupation. He drifts through school and is glad to get the first job that will give him food and clothing. He invites people to cheat him at trade by neglecting to inform himself of the rules of trade. He invites illness by neglecting to inform himself of the rules of sound health. He invites poverty by neglecting to protect himself against the environmental influences of the poverty-stricken. He invites failure at every step he takes by neglecting to exercise the caution to observe what causes people to fail. He invites fear in all its forms by his lack of caution in examining the causes of fear. He fails in marriage because he neglects to use caution in his choice of a mate, and he uses still less caution in his methods of relating himself to her after marriage. He loses his friends or converts them into enemies by his lack of caution in relating himself to them on the proper basis.
Are all people lacking in caution?
No, only those who have acquired the habit of drifting. The non-drifter always uses caution. He carefully thinks his plans through before he begins them. He makes allowances for the human frailties of his associates and plans ahead to bridge them. If he sends a messenger on an important mission, he sends someone else to make sure the messenger does not neglect his mission. Then he checks on both of them to be sure his wishes have been fulfilled. He takes nothing for granted where caution provides a way to ensure his success.
Isn't over-caution as detrimental as lack of caution?
There is no such thing as over-caution. What you call over-caution is an expression of fear. Fear and caution are two entirely different things.
Don't people mistake fear for over-caution?
Yes, that does sometimes happen. But the majority of people create for themselves far more disastrous hazards by total lack of the habit of caution than by over-caution.
In what way may caution be used most advantageously?
in the selection of one's associates, and in one's method of relating oneself to associates. The reason for this is obvious. One's associates constitute the most important part of one's environment, and environmental influences determine whether one forms the habit of drifting, or becomes a non-drifter. The person who exercises due caution in the choice of associates never allows himself to be closely associated with any person who does not bring to him, through the association, some definite mental, spiritual, or economic benefit.
Isn't that method of choosing associates selfish?
It is sensible and leads to self-determination. It is the desire of every normal person to find material success and happiness. Nothing contributes more to one's success and happiness than carefully chosen associates. Caution in the selection of associates becomes, therefore, the duty of every person who wishes to become happy and successful.
TMB.
The drifter allows his closest associates to attach themselves to him on their own terms. The non-drifter carefully selects his associates and allows no one to become closely associated with him unless that person contributes some form of helpful influence or bestows some definite benefit.
It never occurred to me that caution in the selection of friends had so definite a bearing on one's success or failure. Do all successful people exercise caution in the selection of all their associates, whether in business, social, or professional relationships?
Without the exercise of caution in the choice of all associates, no one may be certain of success in any calling. On the other hand, lack of exercise of caution brings almost certain defeat in whatever one undertakes.
Summary.
So that was actually the end of the book. I don't know if y'all want to hear the summary. Like, it's only, 12 minutes left of that. I guess we can finish it to the end.
Things connected with my interview with the devil interest me most. These three factors interest me because they have been the most important influences in my own life, a fact which any listener of my story can easily discern. The three important factors are the habit of drifting, the law of hypnotic rhythm through which all habits are made permanent, and the element of time. Here is a trio of forces which hold inviolate the destinies of all men. The three take on a new and more important meaning when they are grouped and studied as a combined force. It takes but little imagination and scarcely any understanding of natural laws for one to see that most of the difficulties in which people find themselves are of their own making. Moreover, difficulties seldom are the outgrowth of immediate circumstances. They are generally the climax of a series of circumstances which have been consolidated through the habit of drifting and with the aid of time.
No.
Samuel Insull did not lose his $4 billion industrial empire as the result of the Depression. He began losing it long before the Depression, when he became the victim of a group of women who flattered him into turning his talents from public utilities to grand opera. If ever a man in a high position
CJ's comments work. Go,
went down because
let
of the
him know
power
that.
of drifting, hypnotic rhythm, and time, that man was Samuel Insull. I am writing from accurate knowledge of Mr. Insull and the cause of his troubles dating from the time that I served with him during the World War to the time of his ill-advised attempt to run away from himself. Henry Ford went through the same depression that swept Mr. Insull under, but Ford came out on top without a scratch. Do you want to know the reason? I'll tell you. Ford has the habit of not drifting on any subject. Time is Ford's friend, because he has formed the habit of using it in a positive, constructive manner, with the aid of thoughts of his own making, woven into plans of his own creation. Take any circumstance you wish, measure it with reference to its relationship to the habit of drifting, hypnotic rhythm, and time,
Use
and
your
you may
imagination.
ascertain
Manifest
accurately
it
the
for
cause
yourself.
of all success.
If you want him to recognize you, you gotta manifest it for yourself. It may not even come through YouTube. Who knows? It may come from Instagram. But you ain't gonna get it coming through me.
And all failure. Franklin D. Roosevelt went into office with a bang during his first term. He had but one major purpose in mind, and that was very definite. It was to stop the stampede of fear and start people to thinking and talking in terms of business recovery instead of business depression. In carrying out that purpose, there was no drifting. The forces of the entire nation were consolidated and moved as one to help carry out the president's definite purpose. For the first time in the history of America, The newspapers of all political leanings, the churches of all denominations, the people of all races and colors, and the political organizations of all brands united themselves into one stupendous power for the sole purpose of helping the president restore faith and normal business relationships in the country. In a
Do you see what it took for the America to be one? Like for one man to have an idea and a definite purpose, and like for the whole Democrat and Republic to come together behind this one man. Like, why we ain't seen that in the future? When the last time that happened? Like, I can't remember it. Shit.
held between the president and a group of emergency advisors a few days after he went into office. I asked him what was his major problem. He replied, "It is not a question of majors and minors. We have but one problem, and that is to stop fear and supplant it with faith." Before the end of his first year in office, the president had stopped fear and supplanted it by faith, and the nation was slowly but surely on the way out of the jungle of depression. By the end of his first term, mark well the element of lapse of time, the president had so effectively consolidated the forces of American business and private life that he had an entire nation in back of him, ready, willing, and enthusiastically desirous of following his lead, no matter which way he went. These are facts well known to everyone who reads newspapers or listens to the radio. Then came another presidential election and the opportunity for the people to express their faith in their leader. They expressed it in a landslide without precedent in American politics, and the president went into office a second time with an almost unanimous electorate vote, with only 2 states meekly dissenting. Now observe how the wheel of life began to reverse itself and turn back in the other direction. The president changed his policy from definiteness of purpose to indefiniteness and drifting. His change of policy split the powerful labor group and turned more than half of it against him. It split the almost solid following he held in both houses of Congress, and more important than all this, it split the American people into pro and anti groups, with the result that about all the president had left of his original political assets was his $1 million smile and his ready handshake. Obviously not enough to enable him to regain the power he once wielded in American life. Here, then, we have an excellent example of a man who skyrocketed to great power through definiteness of purpose and belly flop to the starting point by his habit of drifting. In both his rise and his fall can be seen clearly the operation of the principles of drifting and non-drifting reaching a climax through the power of hypnotic rhythm and time.
Outwitting the Devil is about to go
All
off.
my life, the devil had a dramatic story to tell.
It's about to go off, but actually the book is over with. This is just a summary of like what he discovered interviewing the devil. Like, so you never think you can learn like how to be successful from the devil, but Napoleon Hill teaches you can learn from anybody. Like, so very powerful book. Like, if you didn't catch it from the beginning, like it won't be in this live. Like, this is the part 2 of the live because my shit had cut off for some reason. Like, so I had to start a new live. So go back and listen to that. Watch that video. Like, you gonna get a lot of game from that. Like, so it's only probably 6 minutes left, 7 minutes left. Listening to this. So you could chill if you want to, but also once I do end this live, I'm gonna just put a book on my like an audio book on my live just for overnight. I'm just doing that now, like to help build up my watch time hours. It have been working, so that's gonna be my new strategy as far as getting monetized. I heard the book was too crazy to put out back then, so it's just exactly. Well, I don't know when. I can't say it was the last decade when this came out because I can't truly say the date. But yeah, it was very controversial. They wasn't trying to let this book get out. But eventually, the truth always emerges.
Of his dealings with me. He saw me drift in and out of scores of business opportunities for which many would have given a king's ransom. He saw me drifting in my policy of relating myself to others, particularly in my lack of caution in business dealings. The circumstance which saved me from fatal control of the law of hypnotic rhythm was the definiteness of purpose with which, at long last, I dedicated my entire life to the organization of a philosophy of individual achievement. I drifted at one time or another on all my minor whims and endeavors, but my drifting was offset by my major purpose, which was sufficient to restore my courage and start me once more in the quest of knowledge every time I was defeated in connection with my minor aims. I learned something of the hazardous nature of the habit of drifting while engaged in analyzing more than 25,000 people in connection with the organization of the law of success. These analyses showed that only 2 out of every 100 have a definite major aim in life. The other 98 were caught by the habit of drifting. It seems more than a coincidence that my analyses clearly corroborated the devil's claim that he controls 98 out of every 100 people because of their habit of drifting. Looking back over my own career, I can see clearly that I could have avoided the majority of the temporary defeats with which I met if I had been definitely following a plan for the attainment of my major purpose in life. From my experience in having analyzed the problems of more than 5,000 families.
You know what I realized? Why the whole world be against like the elites and the quote unquote richest people in the world is because they figured out the secret. And then black people don't like to read books, so they don't understand. Like it's there for you to understand to get this information. Y'all just keep ignoring like where it come the source. So me, I understand like shit. Ain't no reason to be mad at them. Like shit, they just know this information. They just got this information. This shit been around for hundreds of years, and they've been utilizing the information, and they're not stopping you from getting it. Yes, they not putting those books in the schools in the environment, but I'm pretty sure now this new millennium 2022 you can find any book that can help you evolve your soul or to get you rich, wealthy, whatever the fuck you want to do. Like there's a book for everything.
No, definitely, that the majority of married people who get out of harmony with each other do so because of the accumulation of a great number of little circumstances in their married relationship, which could have been cleared up and disposed of as they arose if there had been a definite policy to do so. They do not live their married life with definiteness of purpose. So the story has gone, all back down the ages. The man with the most definite plan and purpose and the most power rides on to victory. The others scurry for cover and get crushed under the heels of those who are more determined. The answer is not hard to find. There is no use looking toward high heaven for it. For my part, I would prefer to seek the answer from the devil, for he would tell me quickly enough that victory goes to the people who know what they want and are determined to have it. They have mastered the habit of drifting. They have definite policies, definite plans, and definite objectives. Their opposition, which may outnumber them very greatly, has no chance against them because the opposition has no plan, no purpose, no policy except that of drifting along, hoping that something may turn up to help them. In those 3 brief sentences, you have the sum and the substance of the difference between success and failure, power and lack of it. We come now near to the end of our visit through this book. If we were to try to state in one brief sentence the most important part of that which I have tried to convey through the book, it would be something like this. One's dominating desires can be crystallized into their physical equivalents through definiteness of purpose backed by definiteness of plans, with the aid of nature's law of hypnotic rhythm and time. There you have the positive phase of the philosophy of individual achievement I've tried to describe through this book, brought down to an irreducible minimum of brevity and simplicity. If you expand the philosophy for the purpose of adapting it to the circumstances of life, you find that it is as broad as life itself, that it covers all human relationships, all human thoughts, aims, and desires. So here we are, at the end of the strangest of all the thousands of interviews I have had with the great and the near great, over a period of 50 years of labor
Thousands
in
of
my
interviews.
search for the truths of life that lead to happiness and economic security. How strange indeed that after having had active cooperation from men such as Carnegie, Edison, and Ford, I should have been compelled, finally, to go to the devil for a working knowledge of the greatest of all the principles uncovered in my quest for truth. How
Yo, imagine this rich, powerful man who talked to nothing but the richest, powerful people in the world writes a book about having a conversation with the devil. Do you know how people probably looked at him and like reacted to what he did and what? That's why it wasn't able to come out when it came out because this shit would have. Ain't no telling what it would have did. Like crazy. Like and now he's gone. Like and now we listening to this book. Now I'm pretty sure millions of people have came across this book by now. But still, yeah, that's crazy.
Strange that I was forced to experience poverty and failure and adversity in 100 forms before being given the privilege of understanding and using a law of nature which softens the thrust of these wicked weapons or wipes them out altogether. But the strangest of all this dramatic experience which life has provided me is the simplicity of the law through which, if I had understood it, I could have transmuted my desires into substantial form without having to undergo so many years of hardship and misery. I find now, at the end of my interview with the devil, that I had been carrying in my own pockets the matches with which the fires of adversity were being touched off. And I find, too, that the water with which those fires were finally extinguished was at my command in great abundance. I searched for the philosopher's lodestone with which failure may be converted into success, only to learn that both success and failure are the results of day-to-day evolutionary forces through which dominating thoughts are pieced together bit by bit and woven into the things we want or the things we do not want, according to the nature of those thoughts. How unfortunate that I did not understand this truth from the time that I reached the age of reason, for if I had understood it then, I might have been able to go around some of the hurdles I've been forced to jump as I walk through the valley of the shadow of life. The story of my interview with the devil is now in your hands. The benefits you will receive from it will be in exact proportion to the thought it inspires in you. To benefit from listening to the interview, you need not agree with every portion of it. You have only to think and to reach your own conclusions concerning every part of it. How reasonable that is. You are the judge and the jury and the attorney for both the prosecution and the defense. If you do not win your case, the loss and the cause thereof will be yours.
And that's the end of Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil. Yo, that's a powerful book. Like, I wish it was kind of longer, but at the same time, it is long enough. Like, that's all. It don't need to be 10 hours long. Like, it said what it said. It would need to be said. So, man, ain't no telling when the next time I'm gonna re-listen to it or reread it. But this is one of those books that definitely is on repeat. That I definitely will continue to use on my journey, no matter how much money I get, no matter how little bit of money I get. Like I'm gonna continue to listen to Napoleon Hill or Nightingale because they changed my mindset. These old white men help change my, give me a positive way of thinking. So shout out to them. So, like I said, I'm in this live, and then I'm gonna just play a book, an audio book that's long enough to, when I wake up, I'll be able to cut it off. So I don't know. Probably listen to another Harry Potter book, or I don't know. Percy Jackson. I'll probably play Percy Jackson because that's one of my favorite books too. So, and it had a big impact on my life. So, thank you guys for tuning in tonight, and especially those who came back from the first live because I was trying to get it to 5 hours straight without no interruptions, but I had one interruption, but we still finished it off. So peace, we out.